Hi, I'm Greg Farrar, and this is my daily COVID-19 trends live stream. Actually, I normally start with countries, so I'll go back there. And it's messing up already. So when I looked at my YouTube, it seems that I haven't done this for 4 days, which I cannot fathom. Used to do it every day. Normally I do it every, I guess every 3 days or something like that. Come on, turn off volume turn off. I've been alternating days, so it's not surprising that it's been 3 days, but I do not know where that fourth day went. Oh, actually, I know where the third day went too, because yesterday the data source for some reason was screwed up, and it wasn't up to date, and so I could have given nothing but the countries, but the states would only have moved 1 day forward from where we last saw them, so didn't seem worth it to give just a partial one. By the way, on the off days, I do post text versions of this on Facebook. So if you're not my Facebook friend and would like text versions, actually they may be public. You might just be able to see them. I sort of write up the days, the same sort of stuff I talk about. I just type it up every day, every other day. Anyway, we're back. And here we are on our usual total cases. The United States has the most total cases. I would be surprised if that is ever not the case, but we'll see. There could be some spectacular explosion in some country which allows it to catch up to the United States. But as we can see, no one's even close, though Brazil is certainly the worst looking of these. You might say the United States is the worst looking of these in total cases. It surely is, but the problem with Brazil is it's accelerating. Its dots are slightly above its trend line. At least it seems to be accelerating. There's also sort of a way that the dots are consistent. Whatever. I'm not going to get into it. It's, looking at this, you can make guesses about what the next graphs are going to look like, but why do that when you can just look at the next graphs? So, looking at the next graphs, we find, as always, that Qatar is far ahead of everybody else in the cases per million. DCPM, daily cases per million. Qatar is up at 700 something. Now, at least it didn't continue this trend where it was above 900 briefly. It's dropped well below its trend line for a couple days, but that's not enough to say anything. It just means that at least it wasn't above its trend line for the past 3 days. So maybe Qatar is starting to move in a better direction, but right now it's the worst in the world in cases by population, cases per capita. I did see a little bit of a hint about why that would be. Apparently Qatar, oil-rich country, 2 or 3 million people, has only 10% of its nationals living there, or rather, to put it another way, 90% of the people living there aren't nationals. They're sort of migrant workers working oil. And they're packed into these dubious camps, and that's where it spread. So anytime you got high population density, you have a problem. Note New York. And Qatar probably had that problem because it had questionably, there have been some human rights questions about those camps. And so that. Anyway, Qatar is small, doesn't contribute many cases. Chile, however, is a bit bigger. Peru is also relatively large, and so are Brazil, and that's our Central South America cluster, which has been certainly the hottest growth spot of late, other than Qatar. There's Qatar, which is way above everyone else, and then there's Central South America, which is pretty bad, and then there's everyone else, none of which are very bad from the perspective of how many cases they have per million. And even Brazil is starting to pop into here, because Brazil, though it makes the news, actually doesn't have that many cases. Recall that DCPM, the metric that I'm using here, daily cases per million, I think of 500 as a really serious level, a hot spot. And I think I'm going to start separating hot spot into cases hot and growth hot, which is to say, are they hot in the number of cases they have per day, or are they hot in the growth rate of those cases? because the same countries are not necessarily hot in both. So Brazil, in any case, is nowhere near that 500, though it makes the news. Peru is well above 100, and Brazil is above 100. And the another line that I tend to draw is at 100. I'll say something is a cases warm spot if it's above 100 cases per day. Maybe I'll call it a daily warm spot. Daily warm spot if it's more than 100 cases per day, and a daily hotspot if it's more than 500. So Qatar is the only daily hotspot. We've had others. New York was in that realm. Italy and Spain were, but no longer any of them, not remotely. If you look at, for instance, Italy and Spain, or just Italy for the moment, latest data point, 3. DCPM is down to 3. It doesn't go far enough back to see when it was in the hundreds, but now it's down to 3. And remember, 100 is warm. So stone cold. Italy is over it. All right, let's move on. The other part of hotness is growth rate of daily cases. And so something that's when I wrote this up yesterday, I was still working on my lingo. Something like this. I think we can say this is hot and warming. Peru is the worst here. It's got a daily growth rate of 6%. So it's a growth hotspot, and furthermore, it's warming, which is even worse. It's sloping upwards. We also seem to see that for Spain, which would be very strange. It is strange because Spain obviously has gotten over this thing. Let's look at Spain as well, and we'll take a glance at why it would seem so strange. We're not finding Spain. It's dropping lower and lower all the time. So Spain, DCPN under 10. Spain is doing great. Now it's true it's no longer a straight downward, and so what we're seeing here when we see the. Actually, let me look a little more closely. I was looking at this earlier and saying, how can it be that Spain is doing this? Is Spain really showing a bad trend? You look at this graph, Spain seems to be doing okay. I have always been saying that I expected these sharp declines. Well, obviously they eventually have to flatten out. If it had kept going, it would have gone negative, and we can't have negative cases a day weeks ago. And so it has to flatten out, and Spain has started doing that for some weeks now. It's been flattening out. So that does mean that the downward, it's not going to be shrinking as fast as a percentage, or at least as in total numbers, it won't be shrinking as fast per day, but it still could be shrinking. It could be losing 4% a day or something. I think what's happening with Spain is it had a few high points right here and had this one bizarrely low point, which is in fact incorrect. It had a negative cases per million, and that's can't be right. So there's a data anomaly here. This low to these highs has it temporarily saying it's rising, but I don't believe it really is. Spain, I'm guessing, is still really below zero. In spite of this graph, there is just a data point problem or data anomaly. If we look at the graph overall, it looks there's something good about this graph. There are a lot of about half the countries in the top 25 are below zero. They're shrinking in new cases. That's good. But even better, I'd say, is that the graph seems to have a general rope-like trend downward. The whole rope is angled downward. It's a little higher in the middle than it is here on the right. So it's heading downward, and that indicates a trend towards recovery. There are exceptions. This one, by the way, Ecuador, we've talked about a lot, is also a bizarre data problem, and not really. It was way out there. They didn't report for a while and then reported a whole bunch. So this also isn't real. And that means that the only real one, and I believe this one is real, the only really warming growth hotspot is Peru. You can see a little bit of warming in Pakistan, but the rest are shrinking. And maybe some of the ones below zero, like Italy, this is more like what I expect Spain to be doing. From a growth rate of -5%, maybe the growth will trend a little bit towards zero, but still staying below zero as it completes the recovery. And then I don't even know what these graphs are going to do when we start saying 0 cases a day. I think they'll just stop showing points. but Italy is not yet recovered. It's just a long way towards it. So one thing to note is that, as we've said, Qatar is the hotspot when it comes to daily cases. It's a daily hotspot, the only one we have in the world in the top 25. But it is not a growth hotspot, or well, I'm gonna have to work on my lingo again, but it's not heating up. The growth is not heating. The growth is cooling. We can see Qatar gradually slow down. Maybe a growth hotspot would be something like 10% or higher, and then whether it's cooling or not. Or maybe a growth hotspot is any place that's above zero. I'll have to think about what the best nomenclature is here. But in any case, the trend for Qatar, less than 1% growth daily and dropping. So Qatar is turning the corner. Matter of days, Qatar turns the corner, and we probably will start to see a sharp downturn just like we have in every other country. So Qatar, though it looks bad on one graph, where it dominates everyone else, is looking better. Still not great. It needs to be below zero. We have this 1 day below zero. Latest day has 2% growth, but 1 day isn't enough to say anything. But the downward trend is a good sign. Qatar is turning the corner and will then start cooling, and eventually will no longer be a hotspot at all, as we've seen with many other countries now. The other thing to note is Central South America. Brazil, Peru, Chile, Mexico. I'm not going to put Ecuador there. It's so weird. But the graph is so weird. It has that data anomaly. The thing to note about this, and here again is where I beat the news to the scoop. I always beat the news to the scoop on this stuff, because the news here's what the news looks like. The news says, oh no, Brazil, Peru, Chile, and Mexico are all rising. While say the United States, well, actually, the front page will say something like, the United States passes 525,000 cases. So okay, that's true. If the news, but they're rising. They're always rising, and so it doesn't say much. More interesting is whether it's accelerating. If the news is being a little more subtle, they'll say Central South America new cases are rising. Now that's a more interesting number, to say that all these countries in Central South America have more and more cases every day. It's a bad thing. And you look at something like Peru here, which briefly had a real spike upwards. It looked like it could just take off. So that's news, rising. But what the rope chart tells us is that though cases are rising, their growth rate is dropping. And so they are growth hotspots, sure. Let's say that these are our hottest growth hotspots, because their new cases are rising every day, and many other countries aren't. But only Peru is actually heating up. It's actually warming, a growth hotspot and warming. Central South America is getting better. It's already down to 2% growth from when we saw Chile with 6 or 7%. Now it's down to 3%. It's dropped its growth rate in half, and it's trending towards, what is this, 2.5 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago it did that. So in about 3 weeks, if this trend continues, doesn't accelerate or decelerate, we'll see Peru turn the corner. And this is our first signal that a hot spot is coming to an end. It's still hot, it's still growing in new cases, and of course the total cases are growing, but the growth rate of the new cases is dropping. So this is, for some time now, we've been able to say Central South America is getting better and better, except for Peru. Peru has one good day at a mere 3%, but their trend is 6%, which is really very bad. We sometimes see 10, but not very often. Generally, the bracket is between 5 and -5. So maybe we say this is a warming hotspot. It actually is heating up quickly. None of the other countries are really in trouble. Everyone is, all the ones who do have growth, other than Peru, we're ignoring Ecuador again. Oh, and we're ignoring Spain too, for the reason I said before. All the other countries that have growth, which is to say all the ones above zero, are shrinking their growth. So it's one step away from actually shrinking their new cases, but they're trending towards shrinking their new cases. Whereas Peru is not. It's the worst in the world in just about every way right now. Well, not in total cases, obviously, but from the rope chart perspective, it's the highest growth and it's the sharpest acceleration. So Peru has it bad. Central South America still have problems, but except for Peru, they're all getting better. They're all heading towards turning the corner. On the downside, or on the bottom of this chart, we see Belgium, United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia is getting better as well. These are all these countries that are doing better. Saudi Arabia is actually pretty quick in its deceleration too. But anything below zero is fine. Anything below zero will eventually eliminate all new cases at some number of weeks or months in the future. The UAE has turned the corner and is doing better. So has Belarus. Belarus has never been a major player here, but they were growing. They were kind of, I remember saying the name a few times. Oh, Belarus turned the corner, is now doing poorly again. Well, now they're doing well again. The United States is right there where it seems to hang. It's exactly at zero right now. Not growing, not shrinking. Trending slightly towards growth though. Trending as though it's going to start having more and more new cases. And indeed, I think on the most recent days, yeah, the trend has been to have more cases. We had a pretty good bunch of weeks there where it was shrinking every day, but the last 4 days are much, I would say that's enough to call it a trend. That one is actually a shrink, but each one of these is an average of 7 days. But we've had 4 days in a row now where the average is, where the points are higher than they've been. And with growth rate of 1%, it's not a huge growth rate, but the United States seems to be going in the wrong direction towards growth of new cases. I will take a moment to talk about deaths because I've been saying for a while now, why is it, I ask, that deaths have been shrinking even though cases have been growing? Well, of course, the day that I start talking about this, it's no longer obvious that deaths are shrinking. They are below zero, but there's sort of a trend upwards and some sort of a terrible spike of 10% new deaths yesterday. I don't know what that was about, but in any case, a health professional that I know quite well suggested a theory to me that I think is entirely reasonable, which is because we're testing more and more people, we're testing more and more asymptomatic people, or more and more people who don't have the disease bad, but who just maybe have the sniffles. We're testing more and more young people. We're testing fewer and fewer, well, as a percentage, fewer and fewer of the people we test now are people who are at death's door in the ICU on a ventilator. And so as we test, and as we've seen, the tests are very impressive. New York, 10% of the population tested. We've done a lot of testing. And as we test more and more people, it stands to reason that the people we'll be testing will be healthier and healthier, because we're no longer testing we're no longer hoarding our tests for the most desperate. We're testing like, I'm going to get tested in 3 days. I don't need to be tested. I don't have symptoms, but, well, maybe I do need to be tested, but I don't have symptoms. I'm not in the hospital. I'm not on a ventilator. And so if my test comes back positive, it's likely I won't die from it, or at least more likely that I won't die from it than someone who was tested 2 months ago, where the only people being tested were people who were dead or nearly dead. Then the death rate was much higher. And so we see the death rate drop, the death rate drop from 2%, which was, I believe, the original estimates in early January, now to where the CDC is saying 0.4%, vastly lower death rates, mortality rates. And so, and that, I guess, is happening because we're finding more and more of the people who weren't that sick, had the virus, but weren't that sick. So there's passed along to you an expert opinion on why death rates drop even though cases rise. And that's good. The mortality rate of this is turning out to be much better than we feared. A lot more people are going to survive this than we might have guessed in January. Speaking of testing, among the top 25 Qatar, Russia, Italy, Belgium, Belarus, and finally the United States. So the United States is doing well. We're in the top of the top 25. And these are all countries that have tested more than 5% of the population. Or again, to be very, very specific, the number of people they've tested divided by the population is 0.05. Not quite the same as testing 5% of the population, because some people get multiple tests. I would say that anyone who's tested more than 1% is doing pretty well. So a lot of countries are doing pretty well, and some of them are doing really well, including the United States. So go USA. Daily testing, we can see the trends are upward. There are some weird things happening here with the UK and Belgium that I don't really believe, but if you believe the data, those are both testing fewer people than they used to, but I'm guessing that that's not actually true. That's some anomaly with the collection of the data, and in fact, everybody is testing more and more people every day. There's this number, 0.15% tested. 0.15% of the population tested daily, which is considered to be kind of a gold standard for testing. Only 2 countries are making that right now, Russia and Qatar. So Russia must be doing a whole lot of testing, because Russia is quite large. Qatar, well, they have this pretty bad, so they probably just, and they also have a lot of money, so they probably just kicked things into very high gear a couple weeks ago and said, we're testing every person in the work camps, every single person right now, and that's why they have this huge testing rate. And that's why they're starting to shrink now. And then the United States, very close. The United States as a whole is close to making that 0.15, which is kind of amazing. So that's quite good. Take a look at the United States. And there are 2 data points where it says that we haven't tested at all, which I'm sure is not true. So I actually think we might be at 0.15 now. All right. So that's the news for the countries. I guess to summarize countries, I do like my rope chart in the end, best of all. And to summarize, countries are still, the rope chart is still a bit frayed. That's deaths. I look at that and I'm like, that's not right. I recognize my charts. Okay, not so frayed. It's actually fairly coherent in this 5 to -5 range, 5 to -5% range. With the single exception of Peru, it's really out there, and I guess there are a couple of good ones down there. But generally, the countries seem to be moving towards a better place, and about a half of them are already over the hump towards recovery. So, good, could be better. Let's look at the states. Uh-oh, my graphs are doing the thing. So the states. In total numbers, we see what we always see. New York, New Jersey, Illinois, I guess. But the first and second wave states, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, they're flattening out. You can see their dots are below their lines. They're starting to flatten out. But not California. As a frequent inhabitant of California, I find this disturbing. California is really the worst looking on this graph. California seems to be accelerating. Let's take a look. Actually, let's look per capita. I think that's much better to compare, see who's doing well, which states could open, which states shouldn't open. Now we still have, this goes way back, doesn't it? This I think, goes further back than, we can see our peaks in New York and New Jersey in the first wave, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. In other words, East Coast. Rhode Island was pretty hard hit as well, but it's completely disappeared from in fact, it was the Qatar of the United States for a while. It was way above everyone else in per capita. But Rhode Island has done so well that it's completely disappeared from the top 25. We don't even see it here, but if we did, it would be above these ones, as I recall. Those all pretty well recovered for the worst ones. Maryland still seems to be rising. Illinois. Illinois is Illinois is kind of a second wave state, and it peaked and seems to be dropping, but not super fast. It's still got a problem for sure. California. So California, this is where the distinction between between daily hot spots and growth hotspots come in. California, it's rising, but it's well under 100. DCPM, daily cases per million, is 60, which is really, it's not quite insignificant. I'd say 10 is insignificant. It's a significant number of cases per capita, but it just doesn't compete with any of these 300-400s here. It's not even warm. Warm is 100 in my nomenclature. Warm is 100, hot is 500. And so California is not a hot spot. But if we look at the rope chart, let's see what the rope chart's showing us now. I think we see, yeah, so California on the rope chart is second worst. And so it's something like, let's say 0.2, let's say 0.01 or 0.01, 1% daily growth makes something a growth warm spot. And who are the growth warm spots here? We've got Tennessee, Arizona, North Carolina, California at 3%, and Alabama at 4%. Those are the states that are the worst right now as growth warm spots. None of them are growth hot spots, 5%. None of them are really bad, but they're all rising still. And California is the second worst in the nation. If you look at the states as a whole in this graph, they look pretty good. There is a downward trend of the rope. There are certainly a majority of states are below zero. They're shrinking. And there's a sort of this cluster that's right around zero. And then there are the growth warm spots. Again, Tennessee, Arizona, North Carolina, California, and Alabama. Those are the ones, and this doesn't consider population, so this is just considering how fast are they growing in new cases. If you're above zero, you're headed for trouble. If you're below zero, you're doing fine. And the worst we could imagine is something that's a growth hotspot and a daily hotspot, or even a growth warm spot and a daily warm spot. But Maryland, for instance, which is our warmest, warmest in daily cases. Let's say we throw in Illinois and Minnesota in there as well. Let's just focus on those: Illinois, Maryland, and Minnesota. We see that the states with the most cases, the most daily cases, the warmest, daily warmest states, the daily hot spot or warm spots, those are all cooling off quickly. So this is kind of a good combination. The worst hit cases, the ones that have the most daily cases right now, are the ones that are shrinking the most quickly. And I think this is what we've been seeing throughout. When you get to that point where you're suddenly extravagantly above everyone else, that's also tends to be the point where you're peaking. And so those cases are shrinking away. And we just don't have any that are really big. First of all, we don't have any that are really big at all. Nothing like those. New York, New Jersey, those hopefully are creatures of the past. We may never see another 300. We'll see. But we certainly haven't seen one for weeks and weeks and weeks. So we don't have anyone who's very hot anyway, but those who are warmish are the ones who are shrinking, and they're cooling off. So if we can just stay in that place, we'll at least never lose a grip on the epidemic. If the warmest daily states are also the ones that are cooling fastest, we're in good shape. Let's look at Colorado for a minute. Colorado's always fun to look at because I spend some time there and I have some people there. So for comparison, Colorado, unfortunately the data seems to be weird here, very weird, very weird. We have some really low and really high points. And Colorado does not have daily cases per million of 4,000, I guarantee it. So I can't really tell you anything about Colorado. This data is just going to be whacked no matter what I do with that much And Colorado's always been kind of bad with its reporting. But this isn't even a case where it reported 0 and then suddenly doubled it the next day by reporting 100. It reported 0 and then reported 4,000 the next day. So I can't tell you about Colorado. Hopefully whatever anomalies we have with the data collection process here will get ironed out, and we'll start to be able to talk meaningfully about Colorado in the future. Yeah, anything else interesting here? The very best ones, Michigan. That's interesting because Michigan was a real second wave state and it's recovering great. Massachusetts, I think would say it was first wave. Illinois, second wave. Connecticut, first wave. All of the earlier states are recovering quickly. Now New York, you can see, is trending upwards again a little bit. And as we saw with Italy, this is probably New Jersey, yeah. Eventually, you reach a point where it does do a sort of leveling off. It drops quickly, and then it levels off. And that's what we seem to be seeing with New York and New Jersey. As long as these stay below 0, there's nothing to be concerned about. New York, at first glance, might seem to be heading back towards 0 and to be bursting into a new wave in New York. I don't know that I would really anticipate that from what we've seen before, though. Could happen, but my guess is New York is going to do more of a New Jersey and settle down at a -2 or 4% and just stay there until all the cases are gone. And then Minnesota, which had quite a growth rate for a while there, is recovering very nicely. Percent tested, yeah, New York's just spectacular, more than 10% of the population tested. Massachusetts, looks like it's a dead heat here with New Jersey. Louisiana, some of those first wave, second wave states, I think, really picked up their let's see. Okay, I just got worried because it says the chat's disconnected. I wondered if I was disconnected. I'm going to go back and reload my other window where I actually see my own video and see if it shows me chat, just in case anyone's talking. It almost seems like my internet might have gone out. I don't know. I'm just going to keep talking. If we miss it, that's all right. There'll be another one in 2 days. So for states, the percent of population tested per day, we have this 0.15 number that indicates who's doing really well. Actually, I'm gonna expand that a little bit because there's a way that we can, with a little clever rounding, we can, I think, make it look like half the states are now meeting this standard. It's close. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Maybe not quite. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Only 11. I thought there were 12, but oh yeah, actually I think there are 2 lines there. Yeah, 12. So California being one of them. Not quite, this tiny cluster here, not quite at 0.15, but very close. They all round to 0.15 if you round to 2 digits. And so, and they're all headed upwards, so they'll be there soon. So we have New York and New Jersey doing the best daily testing, really good daily testing. 0.26, again 0.15 is kind of a gold standard. I'm sure there will be a new gold standard once half the states are here. But we have that. We pretty much have half of the states that are succeeding at that testing level. And then there's the question of how many positive tests we have. The percentage of positive out of the number tested is dropping rapidly. New York and New Jersey are the worst in this case. They're dropping very quickly, but they had a long way to come because they were testing 40% or something at their peak. 50% of tests at peak in New Jersey were positive. And so to bring that down to 10% is quite a trek, but they're doing it day at a time. The ones who've actually already succeeded in bringing it down to 10%, which is one of the gold standard metrics, are, well, it's just a lot. That's a lot. Tennessee, Florida, California still here. I think I could more easily point the ones that haven't. A lot of states are meeting that metric. Look at the ones that haven't. The ones that haven't, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Still about less than half have met it, but it's these ones are certainly close. Actually, these ones have met it. We can say Louisiana's met it on average. Michigan. So about half of states also have met that metric where 10% of who they're testing is negative. All right, moving on to the counties. Well, let's summarize. So the states are doing great testing. None of the states are hot in terms of by population. We don't see any states anymore that have the sort of thing we saw with New York, New Jersey. The ones that are hot are cooling, or the ones that are in upper warm are cooling. And California may be the only one that actually has, but see, California is cool still. It's not even hot, not even warm. So California, it doesn't look great, and it is growing at 3% a day, and it has a lot of days where the growth has been very high. There's a way that California looks like the worst state right now to me of all of them. Alabama's pretty bad too, but it still doesn't have that many cases. So if this curve can turn itself around and head back to zero in the next couple of weeks, then we may never reach 100 daily cases per million. But if it stays here for the next couple of weeks, we will certainly reach 100, and it will go arbitrarily high if it can't bring it down to zero. So California still has a problem. It is growing. 3% is nothing to laugh at. It is a problematic number, 3% daily growth, and it's accelerating a little bit. So we'll keep watching California. And now let's move to California, where we can break this down by county and try to get a sense of why is it so bad. And again, it's not so bad. It's just worse than the other states. It still has only 60 daily cases per million, compared with, say, 700 for Qatar, or 400, 500, 600, I think, was the peak in New York. It's at 1/10 of what New York hit. Oh boy. Now, if I can't load this. I do think my internet is down somehow. All right. Well, maybe I'll just call it a day for today. I hope that some of you got to hear this. If not, I'll take a look and see how long the video actually went before it cut out, if it cut out. But even if the internet is somehow streaming, I'm not successfully able to reach my reports for California. In case people can still hear this, though, I will say California looks much like it did. It's most counties are growing. Los Angeles still has it very bad. I don't remember the DCPMs. They're not terrible. Daily cases per million aren't terrible. California as a whole is 60, but I don't remember where, for instance, Los Angeles lands on that. I will say that Imperial is getting better, and I think Kings is still somewhere in the middle. And those are really the only three that have it bad in terms of DCPM, that have it even remotely bad. They're not, and Imperial and Kings were hot spots and cool spots respectively, I think, and nothing else was. And I think that's still the case. So I will figure out whether this stream failed very early on. If so, I'll probably just do it again tomorrow. Otherwise, tomorrow will probably be another written report. So I'm